Start with the pink mustache mug.
Okay. Okay, is it going?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, probably, I was probably 9 years old, maybe 10. We lived at 19 West Liberty in Springfield, Ohio. And all the streets in that area had alleys between the two streets. And a big fascination for young kids my age was to roam the alleys and see what you could find, see what little treasures. And in those days, you didn't have trash barrels. We had trash bins in the back near the alley. And then periodically you could pay someone to come and clean out your trash bin. And then you could just start throwing trash out there again. And then some people had burn baskets where they were wire mesh baskets, and you could put paper and that sort of thing in there. And the wire was to keep the paper from flying around when it was burning. At any rate, I used to walk up and down the alley behind my house and just see what I could find. And then on one of my adventures, I went into a trash bin about halfway down the block, and I found this burned-looking object. It was a mug, but it looked like it might be kind of pretty, and so I thought my mother might like it. And I took it home and I washed it all up, and I gave it to my mother, and she thought it was really nice. And it was this pink mug, which is a mustache mug. There's a bar in there to keep the coffee off your mustache. But it turns out that this is called a pink pearl, and they're objects of interest right now.
There's a key in there.
There's objects of interest right now in this kind of a mug. I don't know that it's worth a great deal, except in sentimental value. And
Yeah.
so it's a gift that I got from my mother out of a trash bin where there had been burning, and there was scorch marks on the mug, and I cleaned it all up. And so we've had it now for 74 years.
So when did you get it from her?
Oh, I never got this from her. This was passed to my sister, Betty, I think. And Betty had it in her little china display case for years and years. And when my sister passed away, I think it was my niece Cindy that decided that I should have it. And then I gave it to you so that you could keep it, and you could pass on to one of your daughters perhaps, and it could be passed down through the family. And so I must have gotten this in my mother passed away, I think, in the early 70s, and then Cindy, when Betty passed away, I'm not sure when that was either, but she gave it to me. I think she kept it in her china case for a while, and then she decided that I should have it. So she gave it to me, which I really appreciate.
Yeah.
It's something special.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, we have a big attachment to it. So there is the pink pearl.
And then now the slowly evaporating Coca-Cola.
Oh, this
Because that's even less than, or when I first remember seeing it, it had evaporated some, but it's evaporated even more.
This little bottle, when I was perhaps 8 years old, we lived on Kenilworth, 2324 Kenilworth Avenue, Springfield, Ohio. And no, that can't be right because we didn't move there until later. I was about 8 years old, and for a Christmas gift, I got a toy Coca-Cola delivery truck. And that was Coca-Cola delivery trucks were big things in those days. Everyone looked at them, and they weren't these huge things where they had big racks inside and guys hauled them out on wheelbarrows. They had cases. But on this little toy truck, it had a double-slanted rack on the back of the truck, and on each side there were 4 of these bottles laying, and it was like a Coca-Cola delivery truck. I don't know what happened to the truck. I think that my sister Millie saved this and then later gave it to me because she knew that it had been mine.
Right.
And so this was from a toy that I had 75 years ago. And so I keep it.
And it's not completely gone.
No, and this is...
I would have thought most kids would have drank them.
This is, well, yeah, it's probably, that may have been what happened to the rest of it, I don't know. But this Coca-Cola apparently has a pretty good seal on it because it's a little less, well, it's quite a bit less than half full. But it's the shape of the original bottle. It's got the regular Coca-Cola written on the side.
I presume there's Coke in it.
And I think
Such as it is.
I bet that's pretty intense Coke.
Yeah.
I would guess that a lot of the water is gone from it. But it's a neat little keepsake. I keep it.
So Kenilworth, was that the same house that Grandma lived in when I was little?
Oh yeah. Your grandma lived there. I'm trying to remember at what point that she sold that house and then bought the house in Northridge, which is where she lived when she passed away.
Because I don't know if I remember the house in Northridge.
It was a little house, looked just like Aunt Mary's and Uncle Bob's.
Okay, brick.
It was one of those little
Two
brick houses
bedroom.
out- It was on like South Northridge Drive or whatever it was.
All right, little one-story.
Little one-story, a separate garage.
But I think it was the Kenilworth house that I went to. Wasn't it the Kenilworth house that I went to when I was 5? Was she still living there when I was 5?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she was.
Yeah.
And you looked out and you saw snow.
Right. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I do remember the other house because maybe that's why I get confused with Uncle Bob's house, because she had a little chihuahua that would run around
Yep.
in circles, and it had the same circuit between the kitchen, the dining room, the living room, and just that dog would run around in circles there. So maybe, yeah, probably the same layout there.
Pepper. As a matter of fact.
Well, Pepper was. Did she call that dog Pepper too?
Yes, she did. She called that dog.
Because Uncle Bob had a Pepper as well.
And we had a Pepper.
Oh, okay, yeah. So
Here.
Pepper is just a really
Yeah,
common name.
Yeah. And, it was just
Yeah.
a little
Black dog.
Yeah, and then later, I remember I think Millie was trying to keep her. She wasn't supposed to have animals.
Millie?
Yeah, she kept it for a week or so where, for some reason, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen because the manager of the apartments where Millie was living.
Oh, that's when she was living in those 2-story like townhome apartments.
Yeah, down the street
Down from
Bob.
Marydale,
Yeah,
right,
right, down from Marydale.
So she snuck it in.
And she did,
Yeah.
but it made too much noise
Oh,
and announced itself.
so I had to get it out of there.
Yeah, they had to get it. It was one of the many adventures.
So Kenilworth, though, was the longest place you lived in.
Yes, I think so. Actually, we lived in a lot of places. The first place I really remember living in was on Carr Street, and it's spelled K-A-R-R, and I can't remember the number of the house, big white house. Carr Street is a street that climbs up a very steep hill from Laganda Avenue. And appropriately, it ends when it curves into another street, which is called Hilltop, because it's at the top of the hill. And those are my earliest memories of where I was in on Carr Street. And I can remember I expressed something that earlier this morning. I was born in 1929. That's when the Great Depression started.
Mm-hmm.
And we never had money. We never did it. But I didn't know it. I thought everything was fine.
Yeah.
We had 2 gardens. We raised rabbits behind our garage for meat. I can remember the 2 gardens, the front garden was like a truck patch, what we call truck patch.
Truck garden, yeah.
You raised tomatoes
Whatever
and that sort of thing. And if you went, then you went past a sort of a stand of trees that separated the 2 gardens. In the back garden, we had rows of beans and we had corn and all the larger vegetables, or larger plants. And if you went beyond that, you ran into a little creek. And there was actually a swimming hole right there. And that's the same creek that runs downhill behind the Laganda United Methodist Church, which is where I began going to church.
So how long were you on Carr Street?
I have no idea.
Short period of time.
Well, in my mind, it was for a long time. We lived there. I can remember that I was subjected to, my 3 older sisters treated me to tea parties where the tea was water, and I had to be one of the guests at the party, and all that went on Carr Street. Carr Street is the house where I got in trouble for hitting my sister Betty because she did something that was terrible. But as you went out the back door of Carr Street, there was no porch. There were concrete steps that went down to the sidewalk. And as you went down to the right of that, there was open ground, and I guess my mother set up a sand pile for me there. And I used to play in that sand pile, and I remember I built roads and had little parks and stuff, that sort of thing. And on one day, my sister Betty came out and decided to destroy all of my infrastructure. She took out all the roads, wiped them all out. And I didn't often get mad, but that really infuriated me. And so I had at hand a shovel. And that house was heated by a coal stove that sat in the living room. And we used to have to put coal in, and then we'd stoke it, and it had a pipe that went up out the chimney. And as the coals burned, the ashes and the cinders dropped through the grate into a chamber down below, and that had to be cleaned out periodically and taken out. And a very popular item in stores in those days was a shovel that was used, a small shovel, as long as my arm perhaps, that was used to reach inside and scoop out the ashes and that sort of thing. A little pressed metal thing, nothing ornate, but in the summertime, of course, we didn't use that, and I had it out in my sand pile to move larger quantities of sand. I had that in my hand, and when my sister destroyed my roads, I swung the shovel and hit her with it, and she went crying into the house. And my mother came out and dragged me into the house, and I was properly punished for having hurt my sister. That was Carr Street. One of the other things I remember about Carr Street was in the front yard, in the corner near the bottom of the hill that ran past the house, there was a huge old tree. I had no idea what kind it was, but it had a lot of surface roots that ran out along the ground, and then these great huge branches with lots of leaves. And later in my life, when I learned the poem "Tree" by Kilmer,
right,
I always thought of that tree, a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's flowing breast. And I saw those surface roots representing that, and it raised its leafy arms to pray, and I saw the limbs. So whenever I see or hear the poem by Kilmer, I think of that tree when I was 5 years old. I started the first grade from that house. So that puts some that puts some sort of but we moved from there, I know, because I started first grade in the little school called, it was Lagana Elementary. It was on the hill on Belmont, and that school no longer stands. At one time it was a warehouse, and they put a loading dock on the front. But now the building is gone completely. But I remember walking to that school with my sisters. But then we moved, and we lived on Lowry Avenue, and I went to school from there. I think there was another first grade school. And then from there, we moved to a house out on the road, Middle Urbana Pike. And as a matter of fact, you drew me this picture of that house.
The top one, yeah.
That top picture is a picture of that house. And I was in the second grade when I went out there. So I remember the timing, and I was in the second grade. And it seemed like a very short stay, but I can remember that the farmer that owned the house lived across the road. His name was Griner, Roy Griner. And my father would get work helping him at harvest time. You know, men went out then, cut corn by hand with corn knives, and I can remember they used to have, they wore a linen glove where your fingers stuck through.
Right, but it
And
kept from blisters from getting?
In the palm was a hook, and they'd take an ear of corn and strip it.
Oh, okay, it was built into the
It was
glove.
built into the glove. They could strip the husk, and they could do that. And of course, the corn was ripe. It was all hard by then. So that's the way they harvested corn. And then they stacked the stalks in what they call them? Shocks.
Shocks, right, yeah.
In shocks.
And then set them up.
And they set them up, and they dried out, and then they took them in and they put them in the silo and they did that kind of thing. So we lived there for a while. That's the house we lived in when I got in trouble with my sister Millie. And in the front of the house was this huge stump where a big tree had stood, and I thought it was just monstrous. It was probably 4 feet in diameter, but I thought it was just monstrous. And they'd cut it off quite smoothly. They'd painted the top gray, and then they'd actually trimmed the outside edge with black paint. But I used it as a play table, and I was out there. It was harvest time. I had a kitchen matchbox, so that was my hay wagon. I had got some corn silk, and I had an old knife or an old fork that I picked up somewhere. It was a metal fork with riveted wooden handles on it, and I was using it as a pitchfork. I was pitching hay into my matchbox hay cart. But my father was working with a crew for Mr. Griner, bringing some crop into the field down the road. And it was very important that I get to the gate and wave to that crew. I mean, it was absolutely mandatory. My sister Millie came out and decided to tease me. And so when I started to go around the stump to go to the gate, she stopped me. When I started back the other way, she stopped me. And the men were getting closer and closer. And if I didn't get by soon, I would miss them. And I couldn't let that happen. And so as the tension rose and the drama increased, I had to do something to get to the gate. And so in final desperation, I picked up the fork and threw it at her. And it just happened to stick in her chest. And as Betty had done, she went screaming into the house, and my mother came out and hauled me in and gave me the proper punishment as usual.
Nothing worked out.
Yeah, always punish the innocent, that's what I say. I always got in trouble doing that sort of thing. Didn't do it often, but when I did it, I got in trouble. Yeah. And we lived out there until, I guess that's when we moved in. We moved from there into the house at 19 West Liberty where I found this cut. And from there we moved to a house at 736 South Wittenberg.
Mm.
It was a few blocks away, and I was going to a Highland grade school from there. And my mother, that's when my mother and father had been divorced for some time. Incidentally, I had three sisters, but I'm not sure that you know that I had a brother. When we were living on Liberty Street, my mother gave birth to a baby boy, and he was stillborn.
Hmm.
He was named Larry. And that's when we lived on Liberty.
How old were you then?
If I was in the second grade out in Moorfield, I was probably in the third grade, so
Okay.
I was probably 10 years old. And but I remember that I was told that I had a brother that
He died.
we lived there for some time. I can remember playing in the alley out back. I can remember there was a summer. Of course, we had no money. My father left the state, and there was no child support coming in. Franklin D. Roosevelt had instituted the WPA,
Right.
And my mother got some work on that so that we had some food. There was a summer that none of us had shoes because she was saving the money to get us shoes to go to school in the fall. And we played on the sidewalk and our feet burned until we didn't feel the hot sidewalk anymore. We actually played baseball out in the alley, a gravel alley, barefooted. So our feet toughened up a lot. So we had, that's also where I lost my little dog, Pal. We got hit by a car and we had to take him out.
When did you get Pal?
Oh, gosh, I may have gotten Pal when we moved into Liberty. I don't remember him. In the country, I remember we had, what are these big fluffy white dogs?
Like Huskies or something?
Well, not like a husky. It's a different. But anyway, the big white dog.
Like a Samoyed?
And he wasn't a Samoyed. And we had him for a very short time because apparently we couldn't afford to keep him, and we gave him away. So shortly after that, I must have gotten Pal. Pal was a little terrier like Pepper was that you had later on. But he and I really hung out together. He was really a close pet. Got hit by a car, and I remember when my mother was in the hospital. That may have been when she had the baby. She was in the hospital, and that dog knew my mother, and we were keeping him in the basement in a box. He couldn't move because his quarters had been crushed.
Oh, man.
And I remember that little dog heard her upstairs when we brought her in. We set up a bed in the living room when she came home from the hospital. And that little dog dug himself up the steps.
Wow.
And scratched at the door. I remember that. And I remember that my Uncle Merrill, my Aunt Helen's husband, took him out and shot him. You know, that's what we euthanized. I went out. He asked if I wanted to go along, and I said yes.
Oh, man.
But I didn't watch.
Right.
He took him out, and I heard the shot, and then I turned around and he had picked him up and taken him off the side of the road. And I remember there was a muddy puddle there, and it was turning red.
Oh, wow.
And it was the blood from Pal. That was a
Pretty sad, yeah.
pretty tough experience. I didn't have many tough experiences, actually, but my life was good. I didn't know that it wasn't good. I thought it was. I can remember living on Carr Street. We had bean soup every day. Maybe beans. I thought that was what you're supposed to have every day. If I wanted to invite a friend in for lunch, I could, or just have some more bean soup. So I didn't think we were struggling. I just thought we were doing well. I guess
So you moved from house to house. Why did you think you moved from house to house? Now that you was back
found
home.
a cheaper rent or something, or whatever happened. We went to Euclid, 309 West Euclid, in Springfield, Ohio. Had a house there. I was still going to school. It was almost time for me to go to, I was going to junior high school at Kiefer. And it was almost time for me to go to high school by the time I left there. So I must have been, 15, something like that. And my mother had divorced my father. I think the last time I saw my father, when I really recognized him as my father, I was about 11 years old. And so it was a little bit after that. And she then had met the man who became her second husband, Max Dyke, who was a wonderful man. We all loved Pat. And he treated us like we were his own children. In many ways, I find myself in his position today.
Oh, yeah.
Because Sharon has two children, they're really good kids, and their father apparently was not worth much. Neither of them have a very good opinion of him. But I get along very, very well with both of them. So, Steve calls me Dad. Cheryl comes in and gives me a hug every day. You know, it's much like our relationship we had with Max. And so she met Max, and we were living on Euclid, and we decided, he had owned 2 houses over in that side of town, off Paganda. He sold the 2 houses. He had lost his wife, she died. And he sold his 2 houses, and they bought the house on Kenilworth, which is the house
okay.
that you remember best. We bought 2324 Kenilworth. And we bought that house and moved there. And so while I was within walking distance of high school on Euclid, I had to take the bus.
And it was the same high school, though.
So we only had one high school. Well, there was a Catholic high school and a public high school. And the public high school was called Springfield High. And that was the only one. So I went to Springfield High then from over on Kenilworth, and I spent all my years. I graduated from high school while we lived on Kenilworth. And for a couple of years thereafter, I was at Kenilworth.
Well, you graduated high school in like...
I graduated from high school in '47. And I enlisted in the Air Force in January of '51. And we lived on Kenilworth the whole time. I can remember.
Well, because she was still there after I was born, right?
Yeah. Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Because we visited there. But I can remember the day that I left to go report for duty. Everyone came out. I was being driven down to had to go down to the post office where they had the recruiting office, and then they transported us to Columbus, where they swore us in.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that Pat came out, and he was crying.
That was a pretty big deal.
Well, the draft was on.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to beat the draft. The Korean War had started. I had enlisted into the Air Force, and so had some friends of mine, and one other guy, a guy named Dick Oates, and I was going on that same day. When we got down there, we were told that by the recruiter that there were so many people enlisting in the Air Force that they had set limits that each recruiting station could only send 2 people per shipment, and they already had their 2 people. So we couldn't enlist in the Air Force. We could go back home, or we could enlist in the Army. And I said, well, I'm here. I'm going to get drafted. I might as well enlist. Let's go. So I actually was given a regular Army serial number, RA, whatever it was. I forget what it was. And we went to Columbus. And I was there, and I was going to be sworn in to the United States Army. But we had to take a series of tests. And when we got done with this, we were all called in. There were a large group of us from various recruiting stations. We got into a room, and the guy in charge said, all right, listen up. It turns out that one of the recruiting stations did not send in their 2 recruits for the Air Force. And so we have 2 openings. So what we're going to do is we're going to take, I've got the list of people that took the test, and we're going to start with the best grade and work our way down. If the guy at the top doesn't want it, then the next guy gets it, and so forth. And the first name on the list was mine.
You said,
I said, I'll go, I'll take it. And the second list was Dick Oates. And the second guy, it was he got the second best grade. And so the 2 of us got sworn into the Air Force. So that started my career in the Air Force, my 4-year career. I remember my mother had been very, very concerned about my going into the Army. There was
a war.
There was fighting in Korea.
Yeah.
She was afraid for me. So I immediately got on the phone and told her I'd just been sworn into the United States Air Force. And she was very, very pleased about that, as was I. I enjoyed my time in the Air Force. It was interesting. I graduated from high school in 1947 in June, and like every other high school graduate, I looked around for a job, and, you know, there were various kinds of jobs. I got a job as a truck boy in a upscale men's store, I think, for a while. But one of my buddies came along just about a week or so later and said, hey, I understand that they're accepting people to work on airplanes down at Patterson Field, the field. Army Air Corps. And so he said, I'm going to go down and apply. I said, I'll go with you. So he had a car. We drove down there, and we filled out all the documents, and we were accepted. So I got a job working at Patterson Field, working as an aircraft mechanics helper.
What aircraft were you working on?
Oh, I worked on all of the up-to-date reciprocal aircraft. I worked on P-47s, P-51s, P-82s, P-81s, but I also worked on the very first jets.
Mm.
I worked on a P-80. I think the gentleman was ended in 123, but it was a jet. It was setting all the speed records as a jet. It was an airplane that I remember. It was painted gray, and then they had a red, white, and blue ribbon down the side with all the speed records it broke. And I remember also that they discovered at that time that paint was not a good idea for a jet aircraft because they didn't have the technology at that time to make paint adhere to the skin, and it would start coming off. And along the wings, leading edges where they had chips, it created a great deal of drag, and it affected the performance of the aircraft. So they decided to get all the paint off, and of course, the people to do that would be the aircraft mechanic helpers.
So that's a lot of chemicals.
You couldn't possibly do today what we did then. They took us down the hill to a hangar, and they had covered the floor with paper, heavy paper. Airplane set on it. They had racks set up, and they gave us buckets of paint remover, which softened the paint. And so you sloshed it on with a brush, and we wore masks.
Yeah.
You sloshed it on with a brush, and we did that, and then we were told to go outside for 20 minutes. And we did that, and we came back in, and then we scraped it off with plastic scrapers. We scraped it in a bucket or it fell on the paper or whatever. And then we used fine steel wool to get rid of it, and we washed it down with carbon tetrachloride.
Man.
Inside the hangar. We worked for 20 minutes, we went outside for 20 minutes. We worked for 20 minutes, we went outside for 20 minutes. But it wasn't a bad deal. It wasn't really hard work. I never had any ill effects, but today you'd never get by with something like that. Using carbon tetrachloride inside a closed hangar. I worked, and the other thing was that I started work at Patterson Field in about, I think it was July of 1947. In August of 1947, President Truman, aboard Air Force One, the Independence, signed the Armed Forces Act and created the United States Air Force as a separate branch of the military. And so one day I was working for the Army Air Corps, and the next day I was working for the U.S. Air Force. And that really became, that started my contact with the Air Force that lasted almost all of the rest of my career, my working career. I had something to do with aviation almost all the rest of my life. And that was good. It was really good. I watched the silly things. Everything was brown, had to be painted gray. And we got to do that. I actually saw cartons of toilet paper with Army federal stock numbers on them. They got shipped back so we could get cartons with U.S. Air Force federal stock numbers on them. And so they did things like that. But it was a really good, I only worked as a mechanic down there for about 2 years, and I got reduction in force. I got laid off. But I got to work on a lot of different airplanes. I worked on a B-17 that some brigadier had turned into a private airplane, and he had the inside kind of pushed up a little bit. B-17s are not the best luxury airplanes in the world, but that was his private B-17. I got to work on all the old reciprocal airplanes that became monuments outside of Air Force bases after a while, and then they went away, and jets became
Yeah,
monuments.
now old jets are
Yeah,
monuments.
and then went on down the line. And actually, when I was in the Air Force in '51, I thought I wanted to be an aircraft mechanic because I had been a
Right,
mechanic.
your experience.
Matter of fact, I got promoted to junior mechanic from aircraft mechanic helper. And so I said, well, I ought to do that. But they did stain on aptitude tests, and they said, no, you're better for electronics. So you're going to go to Keesler, and you're going to learn to be a radar maintenance guy. And of course, if they said I was going to do that, that's what I did.
When did you work at like a potato chip factory at some point?
And that's about the time we lived on Euclid, and it was before we'd gone over to Kenilworth. It was during the summer.
So you're in junior high.
Yeah, maybe I was just about to complete. I was just about ready to go to high school.
So you're 14.
Yeah, and so there was it was a little bakery. It wasn't big like Mike's Cells or anything like that. It was a little bakery, and they baked cupcakes and all that sort of thing, and they packaged them and they sold them. We took them to stores, that kind of thing. But I was hired to bag potato chips. That was my job. They didn't have machines to do it then. They made the chips and they brought them in and they dumped them on a big table. And I had a scoop and there were bags there and it was scale and we knew what we were supposed to weigh. And you got so you knew just exactly how much you put in and you could come up within the weight limits. And then you would roll the top down, staple it shut, and set it in a carton. When you got the right number of bags in the carton, you closed the carton, taped it shut, set it to the side. And so there were about 4 of us that were bagging potato chips. It was kind of fun. It was a lot of camaraderie. You got all the potato chips you wanted. They had their own, they had their machines for potato peelers where they tumbled them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had chippers where they chipped the potatoes. And then they put the potatoes in this huge vat of boiling oil and fried them. And so one of my favorite lunches was to take a peeled potato that hadn't been chipped and throw it in the vat.
And the outside would get crispy.
The outside would get crispy brown and the inside would be like a baked potato.
Boy, that sounds good.
And you'd scoop it out with a wire basket and take it off the side, cut it open, a little salt on it. It was really good. And they had, as the cupcakes seen on the line, some of them would have nicks in them. There'd be pieces that would come out of it, and they couldn't sell them. So they set those aside. So we could have all the cupcakes we wanted, and they had.
Boy, that's a healthy lunch right there.
Yeah, it was
deep
all
fried
good.
potato and
health
cupcakes.
Food. They had containers of different flavors of icing that put on cupcakes, so you could have as much you wanted to of any kind of icing. And ice your cupcakes down, and we have your baked potato and cupcakes.
Deep fried potato and cupcake. That's awesome.
I remember my weekly paycheck used to be. I think it was something like $11.98 after everything they withheld. Well, that was pretty good. But I remember they fired a kid. It was late, something, I don't know. So that was my first opportunity to be an activist. And we didn't like the idea they fired. So we all quit. Left them without anyone to box their chips.
So they hired some other kids to come box their chips.
Yeah, so they probably got some other kids to box their chips. We go down the street feeling all big about this, and we just lost a job where we had whatever we wanted to eat, and we got paid.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
I worked in that potato chip factory. I worked in.
When did you work at the steel mill?
Oh, well, after we had the reduction in force at Wright Patterson, then I started looking for a job. I actually got a job. I got a job selling men's clothing for J.C. Penney, downtown Springfield. and I did a pretty good job, really. Guys came in, I stood them up for suits. I am 19, something like that. And these guys, what do you think of that? I'd say, that's really nice, sir, I like that. And then I became a salesman pretty quick because I found out I could say, no, sir, I don't think that's the right color for you. So they thought, wow, credibility. and so I would unsell a suit, and I would wind up selling 2 suits. And I can remember that store. There were no cash registers on the floor. You made a sale, you went over, and you wrote out a sales slip. And if it was a $35 suit, expensive one,
Yeah.
the guy gave you a 220s, no credit cards,
Right.
no credit cards. And you put the 220s in the sales slip in this little basket. And we had a trolley system. There was cables that ran in on like a little track. And you set this little, you put all the money and the sales slip inside this little car and close the lid, and you set it on the track, and then you engage the clutch, and the cable grabbed the box and took it up to the loft. You could look up, like here, you could look up and you could see the people working up there. It would get up there and it would stop. The people would take it off the cable, would take out the sales slip, make the change, mark it paid, put the box back on, and send it back down. And I would take the box and open it up and give the customer his receipt and his change and thank him. And I remember there was, and we had wooden floors.
Mm.
I always think that, I can never remember the name of the Western singer, the woman that was on the other side of a CD or something, or a tape.
Nancy Griffith.
Nancy Griffith.
Right, yeah.
And she told the story about, well, she said she lived close to Lubbock. Not near Lubbock. No one wanted to live too close to Lubbock, she said. But she told the story about having, that she had to take a bus and get a transfer when she was going to school, which is exactly what I had to do from my Kenilworth address. And she said it stopped, and there was a layover, which was just long enough to go into the Woolworths, and that's exactly where our bus changed to. And you had just enough time to look through the 45s and wink at the boys, and then run out and get your bus. And she said, I always remember that smell. It was like a mixture of bubble gum and shoe leather on that wood floor. And I thought, God, this is really, she's painted a perfect picture.
Right, image.
And I can always remember that. And then I remember she said that later she was on tour in some town.
She was in England.
And they saw Woolworths. And if they had one in England, but she said,
Yeah, it was in England, and she was surprised.
Stop. She told them to stop, and I filled my bags with useless plastic objects, she said. And she left there. But yeah, we had wooden floors at JCPenney.
And Woolworths has been out of business now for
Oh yeah, for a long time.
I mean, they were Woolworths when I was a kid.
You know what?
There were Woolworths here when I was a kid. We used to go to Woolworths. I remember they had a lunch counter and all that stuff. But
Well, Woolworths was
Five and dime.
It was a store on the corner of High and Limestone. And I remember the corner of the building had been cut off, so it didn't come out square. It was an angle. And up high there was a clock, so that everybody downtown used that clock to tell what time it was. And that was the meeting place. I'll see you under the clock at 4:30. I'll see you under the clock. But that was where you met people. And now all those buildings are gone. That entire block has been leveled, and 2 modern buildings have been erected. And you saw the museum.
oh, right.
Where they had recreated all those buildings in miniature. I've done a pretty good job. Anyway, I wound up in the Air Force, which I was happy about. I managed to get basic was practically nothing because there were so many people coming in the Air Force at that time. That while basic was supposed to be 13 weeks like the old Army style, mine was 13 days. I was there long enough to get a few pieces of uniform, do some Say-9 tests, get a lot of shots, and then I got shipped off to a training base. But they didn't have enough room to house us all. My first 5 days, I think, I slept in a tent on the athletic field. They had set up tents out there. Remember we had canvas cots, and it was so cold. It was January in Texas.
So I went through basic.
Yeah, and it was cold or hot. I remember they used to say, if you don't like the weather, wait a minute, because it changes. I can remember marching, and we did a lot of marching because if there was nothing else to do, we marched. I remember marching with a sunburn and sliding on ice. So we had quite a change of weather. Went to a basic down there. They actually issued, they only started getting Air Force uniforms. And like I was telling Naomi yesterday, our Class A, we had blues, they were coming, but every day Class A uniforms were khaki pants, khaki shirt, a blue tie with the end tucked in, and a blue web belt and black shoes. And fatigues in those days were jumpsuits. The single-piece jumpsuits, which I kind of liked. But we were issued, a lot of us were issued brogans. Our work shoes were rough-cut brown GI boots. And we were told that we were to make those shine like a mirror. And a lot of guys sat around at barracks, when we finally got in barracks, we sat around that barracks and you would pour lighter fluid on the outside, and then you would light a match to it to burn off all the fuzz. And then you would just rub in all the wax polish, the black wax that you could, and you'd rub and rub and rub and rub, and then you put another coat in and you'd rub and rub and rub. And you wound up with black shoes that shined like a mirror. And we all did that. We all had to convert.
That was at basic you did that?
At basic. Yeah, because
And the barracks that you were in basic, when you got into the barracks off of the athletic field, what were those 2-story wooden?
Yeah, they were 2-story wooden, 90-man bay, typical barracks that those days. Gang.
Did they have a head at the end?
A gang shower, head, the whole thing at the end. There was an NCO room at the other end, or 2 NCO rooms that faced each other. There was a one-striper that was in the NCO room. And he was a big man. He ran things. We did what we were told to do.
And those were in rows, I presume.
Yeah, the barracks?
Yeah.
They were, and I don't remember, I have pictures of me outside the barracks. But I know they were in rows, but I don't remember much about their location and that sort of thing, like I do about the barracks at Keesler, because we got shipped, after 13 days, we got orders, and we were shipped to Keesler Air Force Base, where I was going to get trained as a radar mechanic. But they had so many people coming in, you had to wait, and they kept filling classes and filling classes. And each class, it was a 5-day period. The next class started in 5 days. And so we were told, after being there for a while, I was in the 3383rd Student Squadron at Keesler. We were called PATS, pre-academic trainees. And we were told that if we weren't selected for the next class, we might be eligible for a 5-day leave to go home. And the problem was they only had so many leaves.
Mm-hmm.
There were like 700 guys in the squadron. And the first 32 or whatever they got there to the orderly room, they were going to get their passes. It turned out I was in barracks number 1 and the barracks were streamed out behind that. And right across from barracks 1 was the orderly room. So I thought, well, I got a pretty good shot. And it was a, you know, again, the experience of camaraderie in the service. All the guys at barracks knew. Meanwhile, I called and talked to your mother, and she said, "Are we getting married?" We're going, "Well," I said, "Sure." So we had set up a deal to get married, but if I could leave. And so all the guys at barracks knew that I wanted to go home to get married. So they stood. We all had to stay in the barracks until there was an announcement with a loudspeaker. Then we had to head for the orderly room as fast as we could. So we stood inside this door. There was a guy whose job was to open the door, the screen door. And there were 6 other guys that threw me out. He opened the door. They threw me out it was raining, into this muddy street. And I got up and ran to the orderly room. And I was like 16th in line. So, and I was right there. But there were guys hiding in the bushes under the steps by the orderly room. And Norm Roberts, who I think you've met,
Yeah.
he's a good friend of mine. I didn't know him at the time, but he was one of the guys hiding in the steps. And we got married on the day. He and his wife got married the same day that your mother and I got married. And 25 years later, they came out here and we celebrated our 25th anniversary.
That's pretty cool.
That was pretty good. Anyway.
In fact, I think we were on vacation one time when I was a teenager, and they were tearing those barracks down
Probably were.
at Biloxi. They were in the process of ripping that whole section down. And there was like the last barrack had the top taken off of it, but the bottom hadn't been torn out yet.
I spent quite a bit of time. Remember, we were assigned duties. A lot of times it was just, you'd fall out, and a corporal, sometimes the buck sergeant would take you, and they would find something for you to do. A building had been torn down, you had to help clean up the site. Maybe you just marched. We did all kinds of things. But I was there I remember it was decided that I would do KP for 1 week. So for 1 week, remember I tied my brogans to the foot of my bunk so that the CQ could walk through at like 3:30 in the morning, and if you had shoes tied on your butt, it woke you up.
Hmm.
And you jumped in uniform and ran over the chow hall, and you took care of I think it was just breakfast. Because, no, we actually worked all day. We did breakfast and lunch. I don't think we did dinner. But I remember we went over there and did all kinds of things, getting ready for breakfast.
But
So we did all kinds of stuff.
How long was your tech school there?
Pardon me?
How long was your tech school? So wait, you came in January of 51.
Yeah, I came in January of 51.
So by February of 51, you were in Biloxi.
Pardon me?
By February of 51, you were in Biloxi.
Yes.
So
well, we got married on March 22nd, which means
Right.
I hadn't gone to class yet.
okay.
And so we went back down. I started class shortly after that. It must have been, I went through electronic basics. I think it was like 6 weeks.
Right.
And then you graduated in what was called systems. And what they did was they taught you a radar system, which at the time was a Q-13 radar. And when you graduated from there, you were sent out to a duty station. You had your 3-level.
Right.
And I'm not sure, yeah, you had your 3-level. I'm not sure you got your 5-level after that, but at any rate, you went out to your duty station. I went through basics. I didn't know anything about electronics, but when they started training me, I really liked it. So I got right into it and studied. I didn't have any problem. And we finished fundamentals, and then they sent me into systems, and I got through that fine. And I remember I was competing to be an honor student. In those days, there was only one honor student.
Mhm.
You know, you couldn't have 3 honor students because they were all had high grades. You had to have the highest grade. And there was another guy who had higher grades than I did. We were competing. And I remember that either he flunked something or I really aced something. And I wound up being honor student of the class. And I applied to be retained as an instructor. And so they did. They retained me, and when they did that, they gave me my second strike. I became a corporal. We still had Army rank.
But then you became like an airman second class or something.
Well, in those days, when they changed, I was still a two-striper. I must have been a two-striper for a while because I went through instructor school, and then I came in and I started teaching test equipment and troubleshooting on the Q-13 radar. And I remember students calling me corporal.
Mm.
So I was still a two-striper. And then at some point, they changed and they decided that they wanted everyone to be called airman something. So a clean sleeve was called an airman basic. One stripe got you airman third class. And then two stripe got you airman second class. And then you became airman first class when you got 3 stripes. And then they added the staff sergeant, tech sergeant, master sergeant. We did not have the top senior ranks that you have now. So I was an airman first class when I went overseas. I was a 3-striper. But now, of course, an airman first class is a 2-striper,
Mm-hmm.
and a 3-striper is a senior airman.
So how long did you teach at Keesler? Must not have been very long.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to remember when I went overseas. I remember that I arrived in Tokyo Bay on your mother's 21st birthday. And so, what was she born in?
31.
31. So that would have been, wow,
October 52.
wow, that would have been 52 in October. That means that I enlisted in January of 51. And by October of 52, I'd gone.
So you didn't even teach at Keesler for a year.
Oh, no. When we got married, she came down there, and we found a little apartment. We were down there long enough that we went through the winter. And we found another little house, and then I got orders. That sent me to Japan.
Then you were in Japan a year.
18 months.
Okay.
18 months unaccompanied.
Right.
3 years accompanied. And so there was no way that we could take her over there. So I went unaccompanied, and it turned out that when I made staff while I was overseas, and that improved my eligibility for bringing my wife over. And they said, you can bring your wife over, but if she comes over, you have to spend a full year here after she gets here.
Yeah.
I said, never mind. I'm like 6 or 7 months from going home. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So I spent the rest of my time.
And she didn't have any interest in traveling around.
No, she did not have any. She didn't like to fly.
Right.
She sure wouldn't have liked going on a boat, I can tell you. The problem she had with motion sickness that you inherited, she wouldn't like that at all. So she stayed home and with your grandfather, and she worked as an attorney secretary. And I was in Japan. And then when I came back, I was sent to McCord Air Force Base outside Tacoma, 43rd Air Rescue Squadron. That was kind of, well, actually the job I had in Japan, at first I was sent out to a site, we call it, up on the hill. And it was a GCI.
Ground Control Intercept.
It
Yeah.
was GCI station. And we monitored all the air traffic. Well, I was stationed Yeah, Massawa is in on northern Honshu, it's about almost as far north as you go in Honshu. So we looked at all the traffic in the straits between the Asiatic mainland and the Japanese islands, and we watched all of that on our radars. And my job was to maintain radars. And so we did that. We had 3 ships.
Was that up there? Because that was ground radar.
Yeah.
What was that where they had the bear? Was that the bear? Was there anything with the bear?
We had up on the hill. We had this main building, which had the office and sort of a lounge place, and then steps that went down into the underground bunker where we had operations and that sort of thing. And then just outside there was this big tower that had this CPS-1 search radar that had an antenna that looked like a huge snow plow, and it rotated, and it had a horn, and it bounced RF energy off the plow, radiated the skies, and we had a CPS-4 which rocked, and it was an altitude.
Height finder, yeah.
So but if you went outside the main building across the parking lot, there was a building that was a powerhouse, and because we generated all our own power. We had diesel generators up there that generated the power. And there was a whole crew of guys that went up there. They were power men. Their specialty was maintaining
Power production, yeah.
diesel power generators. And it turned out that the commander of 511, the ACW group, went hunting, and they killed a mother bear. No, he didn't go hunting. His commander went hunting. They killed a mother bear. She had twin cubs. So his commander made a gift of one of these cubs to our group commander, and he didn't know what to do with it. So he told the commanding officer out on the hill that he had to house the bear. And I can remember we used to go out. We had time to go to duty. There would be buses. We'd leave the barracks to go out, get on a bus, and they'd haul us up the hill, and we'd go to work. I remember we were climbing inside the gate. We were climbing up toward the main building, and they had this little bear staked out on a chain, and he wasn't very happy. In fact, there was a guy that was dumb enough. He wanted to get off the bus, but they stopped the bus and looked at the bear. He got off the bus to pet the bear, and the bear bit him really bad. So he had to be taken off and to sick call, and they didn't know what to do with the bear. The bear kept growing, and housing the bear you couldn't keep him on a stake because he was too big for that. And they built back into the side of the hill. They dug like a cave, and the walls were reinforced with what was landing strip grid.
Oh, right, yeah.
The guys, the metal grid.
Rapid runway repair, and
Yeah,
you could lay a deployed runway. Yeah.
So they got some of that, and they made walls out of it, and they pretty well contained it. But he got loose a couple of times, and the clerk in our orderly room, the chief clerk, sort of a milquetoast guy, but he got the job of feeding. And the name was Bear George, which was the name of the senior commander who had given our commander. So he named the bear George. So he had the job of feeding George. So every day he took George his food. So of course the bear had to know it. And when the bear would get loose, everyone would go into hiding except this clerk. And he would go out with some food, and he would call for George. And he was usually pretty successful. The bear would follow him and go back into the cage. I wouldn't have had that job for anything. I know the bear got out once. We were in the lounge area in the main building, and the bear caught. I remember a little guy. He was a little guy. He was cold. He had on a parka, and the bear caught him out in the middle of the parking lot and jumped on him, and the guy was laying face down. The bear had a hold of his shoulder. He's fortunately had a heavy parker on. But one of the guys with real guts ran out and from behind grabbed the bear's ears. And the bear, what's going on? And he told the kid, run. And the power man got up and ran. He got inside the powerhouse. And he yelled, and the bear turned around, looked at him, and the other guy ran back inside the building. And then we sent the clerk out to pacify the bear. I understand that the following commander went up and shot the bear with a sidearm and had him skinned, and he took that pelt home.
No sense in.
And that was the history of George.
Didn't you get chased up a tower by George?
Well, I was out once when George got loose, and we had these two towers, and I went up to CPS 4 tower. He wasn't very close behind me, but I didn't want him very close behind me. He was out, I could see him in the lot, and he was looking. And so I went up to CPS 4 tower.
All right.